Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Next Level Manufacturing Tech Evaluation Tactics for 2024. My name is Jen Diamond. I'm Solutions Marketing Lead here at Tulip. I am joined by Chris Dennig and Pablo Tosta. So we actually had this session at our Operations Calling event back in September, and it was very well received, a lot of great engagement and conversation. So we thought it would be great to have a webinar version of this for a larger audience. So I'm really excited to present the two speakers. So we have two people that are on either side of the tech evaluation. So we have Chris Dennig, who is a founder of Dennig Solutions, and he's formerly executive at Stanley Black Decker, Desktop Metal, and Tiffany & Co. He has led a lot of different tech evaluations and large-scale projects for advanced manufacturing at these different manufacturers. And then on the other side is Pablo, who is our head of pre-sales and solutions engineering at Tulip, who has been working with a lot of customers on the evaluation process. So it's really nice to have both perspectives here. So the agenda for today is first we'll cover the pitfalls. So what are some of the experiences that they've had on either side, navigating this new area of point solutions versus platforms, as platforms are kind of like this new thing that are coming into popularity. And then also 5 critical questions to ask when you're evaluating different software, and then how to tailor it to your process.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. Appreciate it. It's great to be here today. So we're going to have a good time. Chris and I have, this is the second time we've done this. We had a very good, a very good crowd. And well, starting with the pitfalls, right? So basically, if we go to the next slide, one of the things we always ask is, when do the evaluations become really painful, right? And that alludes to, maybe stories and things that, Chris, in your experience, what are the things that, what is your experience with RFPs? Like, what are your pain points? What's the kind of like that initial push to say, oh, we need a new software, we need a new thing to solve X?
Yeah, Pablo, this is a great question, and I think this topic could either be painful or it could be useful or fun. What I typically see, and just a little bit about my background for everyone on the video here is, I've had the great pleasure of launching and scaling advanced manufacturing technologies in what would be pretty large companies, many plants, that sort of thing. And when I first started the evaluation process early on in my career, I would look and say, okay, I think there's a problem here, and I'd like to go scout the universe to try to find some type of thing that might solve my problem. And the next step typically in any company is that you fill out a bunch of documentation, right? And it really is, if it's connected, it is, great partnership with your IT or OT teams. And typically and standard wise, there's a document that exists, right? That is, fill out this stuff, and, IT, OT teams will go out and resource and see what kind of solutions exist. This has been an interesting evaluation because as times have changed, what I've found a little bit is that what I was requesting at first was, and what we'll allude to later in this conversation, is point solutions versus platforms. And so the evaluation and the documentation and the look and feel and everything about that, when you're trying to find an individual application to solve a problem versus you're implementing a effective change management, through building and evaluating different types of ROI statements, right? The RFP process looks a little bit different. So Pablo, from your experience, as a vendor, I think you've probably seen, an infinite amounts of RFPs come through in all different shapes and sizes and forms, depending on the type of company that's doing it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's the type of company, the size of the company, the industry. So there's a lot of different hints within the documentation that will tell you, what's the process and who basically enables the whole journey to actually get a new software, get a new vendor in, right? And those things are usually very rigid because, as you said, it's based on a specific point solution, right? Based on a specific feature list or feature requests, right? And sometimes it's really difficult to adapt to those, and it's also being influenced by many years of like this rigidity, right, in the process. So, I mean, the other question that we have on the other slide is, given this rigidity from this process and from this whole, questions and feature-driven questionnaires, right? It is what do you think? Maybe, from a practical standpoint, because you're coming from operations, right? You're coming from digital transformation improvement. There's also this thing around, on the IT side, because they have a lot to say. It's basically you're incorporating new things to the ecosystem where they need to have more governance, right? What are the key points that you think in this whole evaluation your IT counterparts would have, maybe like given better documentation to understand where you're coming from, right?
Yeah, Pablo, this is a great question. And I will say to everyone on the webinar today, early on in my career, I did not understand fully why, every single smart idea that I thought was good, we couldn't implement. And I started to really get to know my IT and OT counterpoints, and started to ask them questions about like what is their daily life like, right? How do they actually, someone has a great idea, what happens next? And what I found is that everybody in the entire organization that has a bright idea says, okay, OT and IT folks, I just want you to do it. Go do it, figure it out. We want you to implement it. And for my poor OT and IT counterpoints, what happens there is all of a sudden they are managing like hundreds of point solutions, and every single point solution, I'll just bring a thing up that I hear all the time.
And I think it's a good point to actually jump to the next slide. That's actually like addressing this, right?
All right, perfect, Pablo. Thank you. This is good. In that, like, we'll pick up OEE as an example, right? Every plant, like OEE as a general topic, like, hey, I want to implement MES system and I want to have, OEE on my whole factory. Like, what does that mean? It means in reality, every single area of that plant has a different type of measure of how they get information from OEE, right? Or how the systems are connected, or what do they actually need? Like, how do you see if the operator, which is the key, is winning or losing? So like a point solution, although I might consider this to have like great ROI, right? It's like, I've thought about this. There's a thing that I could buy that, costs, some amount of money a year.
And because in the back of your mind is like standardization, right? Comes into, like repeatedly. Right?
Yep. So, from doing that and doing that and doing that, I had a great conversation with an OT leader from one of these companies. And he said, Chris, I want to help you install this. Like, I want to really badly, right? It's great, but here's the gist. I have, 400 different point solutions that my team is managing. And by the way, I only have 4 people on my team. So like this conceptually like clicked in my head and said, like there's got to be a better way, because again, every single plant is different, whether it's culturally, whether it's what they're making, whether it's the type of equipment that they have and their journey on lean, the requirements, whether it's a regulated environment versus something else, right? All of these things come into play. And then you have to have all the people that are available and interested in deploying this and then carrying on for the change management of it. And really quickly, I said, well, this is like broken. Like every one of those has an RFP, every one of those has a request, every one of those has an investigation. We have to onboard another company and so on and so on. So a platform approach means that you can really, really focus on like solving a pain point and like solving a real problem on every single type of manufacturing environment, while partnering with our OT and IT folks to say, in general, what are the minimum amount of, features that we need from a regulatory standpoint, or how do we connect this? Do we have an OT environment and so on and so on? So this like how the managed environment is, but that doesn't cascade into, what problems we're trying to solve. So it leads on to this a little bit more, Pablo, if you want to go into depth on this.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, because it's also you have to actually, it's vendor management, and it doesn't mean that with the platform approach, you're actually going to get rid of all the point solutions. There's a lot of pains between like the overlap of the point solutions that you're not covering. And then a platform approach can actually help with merging those point solutions as well. So, and we can see that here in this map that we have, where it's just basically, we try to categorize the areas as basically what are the areas that usually, the operations folks are looking to attack and with solutions, right? So basically, like, you map it to a digital guidance. Okay, what does that mean? That means you need better work instructions. You need better workflows, better ways of actually adapting to an ever-changing environment. If you're actually, you're doing multiple SKUs a month, and then the next month that changes. So you need somehow to adapt to that environment. And a lot of the offerings out there that are basically offering you, okay, just work instructions, are not giving you the flexibility to also collect data, right, from those work instructions, for example, right? And then you go down that list and production management, quality control, compliance, and then in the middle you have this different clouds of solutions, right, which are basically aimed towards point solution. We see, for example, OEE there, right? You see their connected worker, you see training, you see CMMS, and then you see, okay, there's a holistic approach to this that could be an MES, right? But at the end of the day, are you really solving the pain points with actually introducing a big point solution that is really complicated to evaluate and install? I don't think so, because there's another way of actually looking at this. It's just basically saying, all right, let me just actually see what the problems are, and then have that as the multiple solution solver, and then see, use it and grow from there, right? Which is, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually getting rid of all the point solutions. It means that you're actually growing out of those point solutions to become, a platform solution provider, because at the end, you have a diverse environment of cultures, plants, processes, lean adoption, digital journeys in your whole ecosystem of plants that, require that, right?
Pablo, for everyone on the call, I want to add a great example of this. I think it could resonate everywhere. So in aerospace casting company that I was with, in their a burnout and casting area, they had, over 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, had a number of different types of recordings of information. And the operator had to switch between 6 different screens, right, to record each bit of information on every one of those screens. And then also, because they didn't have a point solution for some of the outputs, which is like time, temperature, how many things are being loaded, and so on, what's the SKU number, like all these things, he had to write on a piece of paper, some of the outputs here. And so you look at that, and the first like response was, oh my gosh, like they've been using this for X amount of years. Like we can't just like change this. Like we can't just like do something different. And my response to that was, okay, cool. Like don't change it. Just have one like UI. Just compile this into one UI. Maybe you have the same recording that you're doing on paper. You just digitize it, right? That's like the first step. That UI is the thing that operator interacts with. And to Pablo, your point, it does all of these different things and records all of these different types of data or information. To one, it was helping him just like not, was making his job, more fun, right? Where it wasn't this tedious task of recording all this stuff. And then the outcome of that was that for the first time, all of those types of things were being recorded in one functional platform from all of these like different types of point solutions, where the process engineers, the management looked at that and said, great, okay, what do we actually want to have like actionable from this, right? Do we want to have, additional like features on here? Do we want to have like whatever it is? But they weren't able to see that because going through the data of every single one of those point solutions was like, it was just like busy work. Traditionally, we focus so much on like the way that something is, like all the rules around something being installed. And what that means is like, you have to know every single, like on a machine, right? The cycle time, like you have to know what the changeover, like you have to know all of the stuff. And I found
and it's like Chris, and sorry to interrupt, but this brings a very good point where it's how do humans learn, right?
Yeah.
You learn from doing, right? But if you define everything on a piece of paper, do you really know that works? Do you really know, like, yeah, theoretically by experience, it might, but until you actually touch it, test it, feel it, you won't know.
Yeah. And to that, like another point here is that what was missing is that the user of this was the frontline operator, right? They were the individual that ultimately had to interact with whatever was the bright idea that we came up with, right? And because point solutions are so rigid, right? They're not flexible based upon your manufacturing environment, which I can tell you for a fact, everyone on this call, your manufacturing environment is different than anyone else on this call's manufacturing environment, right? The way that your operators interact, how they like to interact, it could be language, it could be whatever it is. And so the problem that we were first trying to solve was, can the operator win or lose with this application? Meaning, instead of going after and looking at analytics and saying, we're going to solve a problem, we're going to have a lean stand up and solve a problem the next day. At that point, hour by hour, the applications and the interface and the way that people were using it, the operators had such feedback in the way that the thing was designed and the way that they interacted with it, that it was sticky. It became something that they enjoyed doing. It wasn't a chore. It helped them know, I'm 50 units ahead today, right? And you know what? I'm having a tough day. I'm just giving you an example. I'm having a tough day in the back half of my hours here. I'm going to slow it down a little bit. I may not be feeling the best, or I'm going to speed it up, or whatever it is. But they knew exactly how they were operating in that day. And so the process engineers, the management, had time to really, really focus on individual areas or individuals or problems that were really, really a key problem, instead of looking at how to manage that floor or that environment or that cell with every single person in it. It was self-managed.
And I think that's a good point that we're going to expand on the next point, because it's actually like the difference between, again, the point solution versus the platform, and basically discovering the solution from the pain point instead of from the process that you're trying to do top down, right?
Yep.
And this actually, like this timeline that's actually here, reflects the traditional way of like, all right, it's a top down approach, defining absolutely everything beforehand. and then shortlisting, more detailed analysis, selection, stakeholder management, all of those things. And it gets really complicated when you're actually doing multiple point solutions, right, throughout the time. And you see that, on the next slide, one of the things we allude to is just, it's time that you're losing implementing something that will basically save you money, right? So you're investing a lot of time and trying to define the way to actually procure this process instead of just like starting and implementing something that will basically create the highest value quickly, right?
Yeah.
And then with that, then you keep evaluating, expanding on, right? Which is something, a platform solution offers, right?
2 years, Pablo, for everyone on this call, like, what does 2 years of lost productivity look like for you? Like, for me, and in the companies that I work with, this was like millions of dollars, right? This was a lot. And at the end of that, I would tell you, it's like, you can have a crystal ball and a lot of experience and whatever it is, but like, you don't know if that thing needs revisions or anything else after it's like deployed, right? With a typical point solution, RFP process, going through all the environments, through all the testing, everything like that. At the end, also 2 years, how much has your manufacturing environment changed in 2 years? I can tell you, every year we're updating and changing cell structure and moving things around, and new equipment comes on board and all that stuff. Like, it's just, it doesn't make any sense today to go about it in this way.
Yeah. And the same applies for regulated industries like life science industries, like the life sciences industry. I mean, this is just like separate timelines for like selection and kickoff, and a little bit of proof of screenshots that we've gathered, and basically say, okay, well, look at this timeline of, it takes you 6 months and actually to shortlist a vendor. And then the other thing is that we talked a little bit is just the feature-based requests, right? That are the underlying structure of an RFP, which, it's painful.
Yeah, Pablo, to this one also, like, one of the things for our IT and OT friends, right, from like an RFP standpoint, is like the first question I ask is like, is whatever it is it validated, right? Is there a way that it is for your industry, and what are all the things that company is doing, right, to protect your data, all of the rules, regulations, everything else. And if that's like a check, like, I think it's like 10 questions, right? I'm making that number up, but it's a checklist. Yes. Like, we have all these things. It's a validated platform. Like, let's go. And that means you can start fast without high risk, like with super, super limited risk, meaning the risk is that you don't know all the information from your users yet. But that's also the point of being able to have a continuous improvement platform, because as you learn more, the application can have different attributes to it. You can add to it, and add to it over the years, right? To where you have this fully connected, functional, change managed, environment, and you've realized what connected factory means.
Exactly. And that also brings a good point around, make sure that you understand the culture of the platform that you're partnering with and the vendor that you're partnering with. So to make sure that they adapt. So, I mean, this, the second point is it's reiterating on the fact on how to navigate this question about, okay, I got to eliminate my point solutions. I have to actually know what the pain points are. And then there's also, okay, let me go ahead and basically define this with a platform approach in mind, right? What changes do you need to introduce? What are the benefits in terms of the evaluation process? And I think, Chris, you already talked about it, but maybe in the next slide, there's a clear like mapping and indication of like from to kind of like, approach, right? And the methodology or the framework behind it that you've seen from your
absolutely, right? So like just to make it clear off the bat, right? Like for regulated folks here or industries, like Tulip has a validated environment, right? So like that's the first thing, right? So going on to the from to, right? It's like you again, let's reiterate, my IT and OT friends, I love you. We'll thank you for all your help. Managing hundreds of point solutions and data silos, the two is, you have one managed platform with standard governance and global standards, like period. This kind of divide, like some companies have like an IT team that manages OT. Sometimes it's like there's two separate teams and so on and so on. It's okay either one, right? But ultimately, again, it's an all or nothing deployment, right? You pick a company, you say, right, like we think they have, a good reputation, they have some features that we like and so on and so on. All of the documentation and requirements around this. And at the end, it is, no matter how good it is, right? We said before, it could take a year, it could be 2 years. Are you actually like solving the same problem 2 years from now, right? Or a year from now, or 6 months from now, for that matter, right? Whereas you have low risk implementation. The key here in all the deployments that I've done is that the people at the plant on the shop floor know the actual problem that they're solving, and they need to be empowered to make applications themselves, right? I kind of know, right? But I don't do a day-to-day activity that says like, hey, you should do this and this and this. And so this feedback loop of, hey, the people on the shop floor, if there's a point solution, I want you to switch this and this and this. That like, recurring feedback is months and months and months. And then the folks on the shop floor that just wanted to solve a problem get really, really frustrated, I could tell you.
And that's when Excel comes in.
Yeah, and you revert back, to the easy thing, paper. You revert back to paper.
Yeah. And then it takes a while to get metrics collected, yada yada yada. Yeah.
So sandbox environments, right, for proof of concept, managed their own cloud resources. So sometimes this is good for regulated business, like there's rules around this, right? They're for different types of businesses and cloud environments. Great. The cool thing about Tulip is that there's all different types of deployment options. So like the great thing is, all right, you want to talk to someone at Tulip about, doing a really quick, POV or POC, right? It's fast and flexible. You can spin it up in days and hours and like start to make things and start to get feedback from those operators that I keep reiterating. Like that's the key to success, is they have to be, making the things that help their job go easier, faster, better, whatever it is. And you'll see, payback in terms of ROI and productivity in tenfold if they own the solution that they've created, right? So transactional vendor customer relationships, you're super reliant on the vendor, right? Like every single thing that you want to change, and again, every one of our plants is completely different than the next plant. You have to go back and say like, well, I do this a little bit differently. Can you change this feature, change this feature? All of a sudden, what happens? It's like, okay, your initial like quote just went up, timing expanded, and so on and so on. So what Tulip does, and what I found is super successful, is like it's a partnership, right? Tulip offers, really, really simple, functional, platform-based like application building that is, focused on training and learning. There's a Tulip library to get you started. There's all of these things that help you be, self-sufficient, and that's how you win, right? And then
while not leaving aside, and sorry to interrupt, but while not leaving aside the governance,
yeah,
and the way how to grow in a structured way too, right? Which is really like mapped to the next thing, right?
Yeah, we didn't touch on that. We'll talk a little bit about it. Is like, it's not a free for all, right? In every type of company, right? It's like there's a in one company we called it like the Starbucks experience, right? Which is like we have a standard UI look, feel, There's a review that happens to say like, okay, is this administering to all of our regulations and everything else? So there's like different reviews that happen from all the stakeholders. It's not like, hey, folks on the shop floor, go make whatever you want. Now we encourage that to happen. We want everyone to think about a continuous improvement mindset, make different applications, learn and grow with it. But there is a governance review process that I think to touch on that as well, Pablo, is super critical to maintain security and change management for the business.
Right, change management and who does what, Aaron. So
yep.
It's not a free for all. It's
not a free for all, no. And then ultimately, like target validations, right? This is like the scope here is like, okay, over the next 30 days, right, or less, we're going to do a thing, and we need like 2 people in the plant to help us do this. Like that's the scope, right? You don't need like all of these people and all of this time and everything like that. All of a sudden, you see that like really like recurring in terms of time, energy, everything else, like over and over and over and over and over. And it goes into this like validation loop, right? That is the governance portion, it's the security portion, but that feedback becomes just like part of the way that the team operates. So our OT and IT and like HR teams and everything else, everyone gets involved in the success of this, solution. Versus in my experience, it's usually been like, our OT and IT team are like getting a requirement or a business requirements documentation from the operations team saying, go hunt and peck and find this thing, and then we'll deploy it. But there's not a lot of feedback from all the other stakeholders.
So what would you think, talking about this, and this is a good segue for the next couple of slides, right? What do you think it could be like a good framework for this, right? Which is, mapping out all of the things that you just said into maybe a decent process that provides that continuous improvement loop, but basically focuses on the problems that you're solving, right?
Yeah. So I mean, everyone can kind of call this a different thing. I call this like business requirements documentation. You're thinking about the problem you're solving, right? So you're just like defining the objective. Like what does winning look like, as an example? Decide on the scope and use cases. I have, an assembly cell that I would like to connect with work instructions and so on, right? And then like list requirements. What do they actually, need to be doing? Like what are the operators doing, right? Versus like the features of the software, because you don't know yet. It could be 2 boxes in the middle of the screen. Like that could be the application, right? So what are they actually doing? And then also super key for everyone here, management wise, process engineering, IT, OT, security, everything is like implementation and maintenance, right? Who owns the change management of this, right? Cost of adoption and maintenance, right? Security and infrastructure, and then the validation approach. Those 2 things are really coinciding with each other to formulate the business requirements document. And that is the first evaluation of a platform, or what I would say is, if you're going to do this, please do this, whether it's a point solution, platform, whatever it is, and understanding once that platform in all of these types of things, specifically the bottom portion, is defined, you don't have to you don't have to do this again, right? Like you've set up the framework that you can go really, really quickly in all of your plants to solve those like requirements versus features.
Yeah, and then on the next slide we have a good example of what's the difference between the two, right? What is the question that you could ask to focus on the desired outcome, which is basically the solution, instead of focusing on the feature, right? So, all right, describe your use case, right, to the level of detail that you can actually map that to an outcome, right? Which is, this is a good example: ability to raise a quality incident at any point during a process. For example, the operator raises an issue detailing the problem and this triggers a notification to QA, right? So basically, this is, you're looking for a platform that is capable of providing an automated alarm to the proper personnel, right? And then have some sort of restrictions to it, right? And then the next one is, how do you actually, because you have a lot of use cases, you have a lot of, potential ways to solve it, but then there's a lot of overlap between the requirements from the different use cases. So it's how do you actually frame that in a way that you don't repeat all of the requirements in each of the use cases, but then extrapolate that into, all right, what is the common requirement that will influence this or will actually tackle this 5 use cases, right? For example, this, the common is I need alarms, I need some sort of notification. And then what is the desired, common requirement for each of the use cases? Well, a notification system that could actually be self-serve and then trigger subsequent system action, which is, creating an NCR, creating something, right? But you're kind of like framing it on a way that actually overlaps and solves, and it's part of all of the use cases that you have defined. So I think if we go to number 3, which is, kind of, we've talked about all of the requirements and point solutions versus platforms. The idea is, all right, what are the critical things that you should ask? Because at the end of the day, we're trying to actually establish a framework in order to ask more questions that will adapt better to the reality on the shop floor, right? Because you're trying to change this paradigm of, I'm going from a point solution to a platform approach, right? So what are the things that, there's 5 categories here, right? One is adoption by the frontline, which is this first one. Basically, how do you actually make sure that people that will have that screen in front of them are using it? And Chris, you gave a couple of examples where maybe, you look at the process, and maybe they just need 2 buttons, right? And that's it, a UI. But then in the back end, you have a whole workflow. If they press this button, it actually hits an endpoint and pushes that information to your system of record. That's fine. But for the operator that's actually touching your product, it's simple. That's it. No more, right? So you're defining that from the problem, from the bottom all the way to the system integration and everything. The other thing is flexibility and innovation. And I think you alluded to that, Chris, when you said every plan is different. Every plan, you need, maybe you have some plans that are actually doing multiple SKUs throughout the year. They have seasonality. They have high turnover during the summer. You need to train people. So what do you need? You need actually something that will adapt to that environment, and it's agile enough and flexible enough. The third point is ownership, right? One of the things about ownership is just typically, it's a big burden. And somebody in the chat basically said, "Hey, I'm the only OT IT person."
Oh, Pablo, I was just responding to Bert in the chat too. Bert,
really?
Hopefully this resonates for you and makes your life and job easier and more impactful. And we can only imagine, all of the requests for point solutions you get every day or every month.
So it's all about this. It's like, you need to empower engineers at the front line to actually own these things. And then basically, the back end, yes, it's IT because you need to control your systems, there's governance, but the ownership of actually collecting the data, and because you're avoiding actually having too many, pieces of paper lying around, not enough data, not accurate data, Excel sheets climbing through, in this whole mesh of point solutions that people create out of the need of having something that better serves their needs that are, closer to the process, right?
Yeah.
Pablo, let's, Jen, how are we doing on time here? I want to be sure we have some questions here. What are you thinking?
Yeah, so I think we're getting really close to the end. So I think if we just finish covering these considerations, and then we'll just show the do's and don'ts, and then we can move on to questions.
Cool, awesome.
Yeah. So basically, the last 2 are just data silo prevention. You need to have something that is actually flexible, that connects to many of the backend infrastructure that you have defined. And then the 5th one is validation, that also alludes to reducing time and cost and the burden of validation, and demonstrating control, which is actually mapped to that governance piece, right? So yeah, we can actually go to 4. Yeah, thank you. So Chris, do you want to walk us through this first one?
Sure. Yeah. So do's and don'ts. Listen, everyone, please, ask open-ended questions, right? leave some. I've learned like leave a little space to like for a vendor to explain like how they're doing a thing, right? If you come with like, hey, I want this and this and this and this and this and this and this, a lot of the times I found that the response will be, okay, like we can do all of those things, but you don't know how complex it is, right? All right, next one.
Yeah. And that's actually like the also like leave space for creativity, right? Because you don't want to tell a prescriptive menu and then you say yes, 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 but at the end you don't really know.
Yeah, this one's like continuous, process improvement like loop, which is like, how do people learn? And I think Pablo, you talked about this before, which is like, they learn by doing. Like watch a demo, get a trial of the thing, right? Start to try to see how hard it is to make an application, which is very easy because it's drag and drop and it's like no code, right? So, and then get some feedback from your team about it, right? That like loop makes you, really, really see like insights quickly into what you thought was working or not. And the feedback of the users, again, I'll just like, beat my drum on this one. Like the people using the application have to tell you if this is good or not.
Yeah. And that goes back to, well, there's other people that have experience with this. Talk to other manufacturers that are in your industry or similar space, right? How do they actually implement this? If you have concerns about governance, ownership, whatever it is, talk to other people and ask your vendors to actually say, hey, we want to talk to other people that actually have been successful with this, right? And we want to uncover and like know the truth, because at the end, you need transparency and you need to be honest with your vendor if you're establishing a partnership, and then the people that will later own the platform.
Yeah, and Pablo, to that last point, like everyone on the call, like, obviously I'm doing a webinar because I truly support and believe in like Tulip, and I've been super successful, like probably the most successful in my career by deploying this type of platform, specifically Tulip. Feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn or ask me questions or anything offline, right? If you have anything like you'd like to dig into more.
Thanks, Chris. And then this last is just basically a summary of, what are the things that from the vendor perspective, I feel all the pains by saying, why are you asking this question? It actually doesn't fit the real environment, because I went to your plant, I saw the things, and now you're asking me a very rigid question about specific feature. Like, is that really important? Right? So that alludes to the prescriptive requirements, right? Don't skip feedback from the end users if you actually let them test. And then don't overlook scalability. See how other people actually did it if you have concerns.
Awesome. So I guess from that, we can move on to the Q&A. So the first question here is, what pains or use cases do you see manufacturers focusing on or prioritizing first?
Yeah, I can take that. That's a very good and very broad question. I think it's just basically, your process, your industry better than anyone else. Meaning that if you actually go to a vendor and say like, I don't know where to start, we can actually walk you through and help you understand like what's that 80-20, right? But basically like focus on the human, focus on the pain point, focus on like what is actually, we're in a world that's actually data driven nowadays. So are you getting enough data to loop that, to basically like feed that continuous improvement loop to make things better, more efficient, right? Are you actually meeting your objectives at the end of the month? So ask yourself those questions, and then it'll uncover a lot of the things that you're not seeing. And one of the topics that I love is, just because I lean runs through my veins, is uncovering the hidden factory, right? There's a lot of things in there that you could track with a platform that's actually nice and easy to adopt for the frontline operators.
Fantastic. Anything to add to that, Chris?
It depends, to echo what Pablo said, it depends on your organization, but like I have found it depends on where you are on like your digitization journey, right? But like if you're starting, walk out on the shop floor and look at all the paper that exists everywhere. And like my experience has been, don't try to like remake the paper in a different way. Like literally make that paper form a digital form and have operators like interact with it. And now you've started like, they're getting used to working on a screen or like changing from writing things down and then move on from there. Like it's not necessarily like you can literally quantify this in like an ROI as well, because the amount of time that, people, process engineers or engineering or management is looking at like paper-based forms and actually gaining insights from this, in my experience, is like very low percentage. And so just by digitizing that stuff, like, you go from there.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, what are the KPIs you see companies use to track adoption?
I think, Chris, you might want to take that, because you have the I have my point of view from the vendor side, but you've actually done this repeatedly. So
yeah, so the number one thing here for adoption is how many people are trained in the platform, right? How many people are actively using, in terms of making applications, not using the applications, but like tracking adoption means that more and more engineers, and like, honestly, I've had some of the best like ROI and productivity out of like my finance team. So like, it's not just like, production management. It's like HR and finance and everything else in the factory. How do you have a training program that really focuses on like, we had a Friday, digital learning, for 2 hours that we said, come bring your application. Let's talk with, either Tulip or internal teams to say like, how can we make this better, and so on and so on. But tracking adoption is new users using the platform.
Great. So thank you everyone for attending. So thank you, Pablo. Thank you, Chris, for presenting, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.